Today on the Word Preacher Podcast, Wars and Disasters, the land where armies feared to go, and the man of holiness. I'm Brett Jensen, and this is the Word Preacher Podcast. Our Come Follow Me curriculum for this coming week will bring us to Moses chapter 7 in the Pearl of Great Price. So this gives us a little more insight than what Genesis can provide on Enoch. He lived in some rough times. The spirit, and we talked a little about this previously, the secret combination of Cain, who loved Satan more than he loved God. The spirit of their secret combinations was to kill in order to steal, to benefit from murder, to get power and possession. Now, when enough people become involved in this conspiracy, they're deciding that they're going to kill many people and take a lot of stuff. It just evolves from a small conspiracy into a full war. Now, many ancient empires outside of this had the same sort of philosophy. They came with large armies and they spoiled cities. They would kill people and take them away as slaves and take away all of their goods, and that was a legitimate business. In the days of ancient empires, the strong do what they wish, and the weak suffer as they must. Now, obviously, this is not a good thing. But it's also important to point out that even if it were, even ignoring the immorality of murdering people to get their stuff, these empires and societies that are built on killing people and taking their stuff, they are never stable. They are very temporary, if for no other reason than eventually you run out of other people's stuff. When you think about that, it's not just that there are more people to go conquer, and it's expensive to travel very far to get that, which is kind of what Alexander the Great ran into. They had traveled so far, and it just, where were they going to go at that point? Even aside from that, eventually people, instead of just spending their resources to develop their homes and produce goods, food, services, that sort of thing, eventually when they see armies coming, they're going to spend their resources instead for defense. I mean, everybody has to do this in the world. They have to defend themselves from these antagonists, from criminals that will have this tendency to hurt them or kill them and take their stuff. Now, of course, that makes it more expensive to conquer even someone that's close by because they have fewer valuables to steal. Now, you could say, but they have defensive weapons and things that could be captured. Well, maybe. Or alternatively, maybe the people will flee. And then you have the distance problem where it's more expensive to pursue them and take their wealth. Ultimately, the bigger issue that comes in is that people within your same society will see, hey, if we kill someone, we get to take their stuff. Eventually, you trust no one. You can trust no one because everyone is willing to kill people and take their stuff. Why not you? And so it frequently falls apart. Certainly that was the case for the Macedonians. After Alexander the Great was gone, it just kind of fell apart. The Mongols with their hordes came, but soon after Kublai Khan, it just fell apart. They couldn't sustain this because, even though instability is forgotten in the name of greed and hate and revenge and other motivations, the wars that are waged are almost always political. A war of defense is a little bit different. You should be able, any nation should be able to defend its culture, its borders, and its resources. But even then, this process of killing people over these things, it's brutal. It's awful. It's not a good thing. It may be necessary. It's never something to aspire to. Enoch saw the people of Canaan attack the people of Shum in the book of Moses and utterly destroy them. Essentially, this was another political conflict where one people wanted to murder to get gain. Utterly destroyed the people of Shum. This was the same spirit, of course, as we mentioned, by which Cain killed Abel. And as a result, God curses the people of Canaan. The land that they possess becomes barren and unfruitful. He describes it as being filled with heat and barrenness, and the people become despised by everyone else. Enoch preaches to many people, but he does not preach to these murderers of the people of Canaan. The scriptures also use the phrase that a blackness came upon all the children of Canaan. Now, it's important to point out that this does not necessarily mean a skin color, just like when we talk about the Black Death. That doesn't mean that victims of the plague had different skin color. It was just a dark sickness and that sort of thing. I think it's important to point out that the prophet of God has very clearly stated, in terms of like skin color today, that we should abandon any kind of prejudices that any of us may harbor for people based on their skin color, whether it's light or dark or any shade, because we're all sons and daughters of God. So this idea that skin color represents favor from God is not applicable to our situation in any way right now today. Even if it did, and we don't even know for sure that it did, even if it did in the past, it does not right now. And we would do well to follow God's current prophet regarding that counsel. All right. Let's talk about the land where armies feared to go. So the success of armies spoiling other places meant that new armies would eventually form. So that means that all of these communities kind of become tribes, and no one is safe. Now, if your army is not able to defend yourself, you could plead with the invaders. But if they're willing to kill people to take their stuff, they might not be merciful. That's usually not a good strategy. The only exception to this, the place where their armies feared to go. It's the place where Enoch dwelt. Let's do some reading. This is Moses chapter 7, verses 13 through 16. And so great was the faith of Enoch that he led the people of God, and their armies came to battle against them. And he spake the word of the Lord, and the earth trembled, and the mountains fled, even according to his command, and the rivers of water were turned out of their course, and the roar of the lions was heard out of the wilderness, and all nations feared greatly. So powerful was the word of Enoch, and so great was the power of the language which God had given him. And there also came up a land out of the depth of the sea, and so great was the fear of the enemies of the people of God, that they fled and stood afar off, and went upon the land which came up out of the depth of the sea. And the giants of the land also stood afar off, And there went forth a curse upon all people that fought against God. And from that time forth there were wars and bloodshed among them. But the Lord came and dwelt with his people, and they dwelt in righteousness. That works out really well when the mountains and the rivers will change course at your command. That doesn't always happen. Maybe it's worth taking a moment to talk about how our expectations should be set when we come across passages in the scriptures that indicate that God will fight our battles for us. We should not take this to mean that nothing bad will ever happen, that no tragedy will ever strike, because sometimes bad things happen to good people, to very good people. Sometimes, as in the case of Enoch, the Lord will miraculously intervene and protect his people. Having faith does not always mean receiving a miracle, but not having faith always means missing out. So what kind of place was this where the armies feared to go? Let's read a couple more verses, 17 through 19. The fear of the Lord was upon all nations. So great was the glory of the Lord which was upon his people. And the Lord blessed the land, and they were blessed upon the mountains and upon the high places, and did flourish. And the Lord called his people Zion, because they were of one heart and one mind, and dwelt in righteousness, and there was no poor among them. And Enoch continued his preaching in righteousness unto the people of God. And it came to pass in his days that he built a city that was called the City of Holiness, even Zion. Okay, so the key to establishing this peace, they describe being of one heart and one mind, and dwelling in righteousness. And this may be counterintuitive to what the world views as a morally good system, which is to be tolerant of many diverse viewpoints, to get in many different ideas and consider many different things, a marketplace of different cultures and different ideas. The divine standard is not that. Not that we should reject people based on their culture or circumstances, but the divine standard is this, that all people give up who they were, they throw that person out, bury them in the waters of baptism, and adopt the viewpoint of God himself. Other identities are insignificant compared to the identity of being a child of God. Now, of course, this makes Zion very difficult to establish, even for people who share many things in common, who share the same religion. Remember the Nephites of old, how quickly they concerned themselves with their possessions and their ambitions, and they believed that they deserved more than others. Pride is a great enemy of Zion. It will cause it to slip away. Among the early Latter-day Saints, in which people were perhaps more unified in faith and culture than we are today, even they disagreed with one another, to the extent that some of Joseph Smith's close friends, who even remained good people throughout it, decided that they didn't like what the prophet was doing, and they, left on unfriendly terms, some of whom only came back much later regretting that they had not been able to swallow their pride and follow the prophet better. So a person cannot claim, I'm building Zion, if they cast out the prophets and apostles. All right, let's talk about the man of holiness. So God shows Enoch in vision the fate of humanity outside Zion. Enoch sees Satan with a great chain having bound the earth in darkness, and he looks up and laughs, and his angels rejoice. And as God sees this, he weeps. And Enoch asks, how is it that this person who is, above the creator of worlds without numbers, above everything else, how can he weep? And this is the response. Moses chapter 7, verses 32 through 37. And the Lord said unto Enoch, Behold, these thy brethren, they are the workmanship of mine own hands. And I gave unto them their knowledge in the day I created them. And in the garden of Eden gave I unto man his agency. And unto thy brethren have I said, and also given commandment, that they should love one another, and that they should choose me their father. But behold, they are without affection, and they hate their own blood. And the fire of my indignation is kindled against them, and in my hot displeasure will I send in the floods upon them. For my fierce anger is kindled against them. Behold, I am God. Man of holiness is my name. Man of counsel is my name, and endless and eternal is my name also. Wherefore I can stretch forth mine hands and hold all the creations which I have made, and mine eye can pierce them also. And among all the workmanship of mine hands there has not been so great wickedness as among thy brethren. But behold, their sins shall be upon the heads of their fathers. Satan shall be their father, and misery shall be their doom, and the whole heavens shall weep over them, even all the workmanship of mine hands. Wherefore should not the heavens weep, seeing these shall suffer? Okay, so we frequently view God as perfect, omniscient, omnipotent, and his power omnipresent, as he talked about. All of his workmanship is within his hands, and his eye can pierce all of it. Surely we would imagine such a person to be invulnerable. But the truth is, he can be hurt. And that is why the devil was laughing. His pain doesn't come from injury, doesn't come from personal attacks, comes from the loss of his beloved children, his sons and daughters, for whom he forged all things, and to whom he sent pleading messages, begging them to come to him and partake of redemption and happiness. When they turn their backs on him, when we turn our backs on him, we hurt him. So many of his sons and daughters were without affection and hated their own blood. Can mercy be extended to those who hate mercy? What would that even be? Would that be mercy? Can the purposes of mortality be accomplished by people who hate their own blood, their own mortality? What would that even look like? It is an arrogant man who believes that he himself is some great neutral power that stands between the high heavens and the hells, who fashions himself some sort of Nephilim, a blend of divine and demonic that can prevail over the great powers in and of himself. This was the truth, though, that Enoch and Moses saw, that God was so far above anything else, incomprehensibly above anything else. And this is why Enoch was confused when he saw God weeping. It must have seemed like a billionaire being upset about a bit of nasty garbage being burned. Like, that shouldn't be that big a deal to you. But it was. Because human beings really are like nothing. We are easily swayed by what we choose to surround ourselves with. We are not some great power. The man who constantly hangs out with drunks, he's probably going to find himself intoxicated. The man who frequently watches pornography likely has some warped desires and urges. The man who persistently serves others grows to care for those others. The man who diligently calls on God increases his faith and righteousness. What you choose really affects what kind of person you are. And it makes that choice super important. To paraphrase Elder Maxwell, if you do not use your agency to choose God, it will not matter what else you have chosen. So about this man of holiness, our God, in order to walk Enoch's path, in order to establish Zion, we have to develop in and of ourselves and in our homes a love of righteousness and holiness, as the man of holiness does, not a tolerance of evil or a justification of bad deeds, a determination to root out anything that divides us from him. He's a man of counsel. The commandments represent really, really good advice. Advice that comes from one who knows all, who sees all. We would be wise not to cast out his counsel. Endless and eternal. His kingdom is not like these old empires that were built on killing people and taking their stuff. His kingdom remains. It will stand when everything else fades. You can trust in God. Eventually, his tears will stop, and you will reap the consequences of your choice, one way or the other. The way of Zion is the way of God. It is to humbly get rid of our dumb desires and replace them with holy desires. When we have faith in God, he will fight our most important battles for us. This may mean literal deliverance from enemies or deliverance from our sins and flaws. The ways of the world, they can't compete. They cannot deliver lasting happiness. It's vital that we invest in something more permanent. We appreciate all the support for the Word Preacher podcast. Next week, we will be looking at Genesis 6 through 11 and Moses 8, discussing Noah and the Great Flood. Of course, there's a ton of stuff we did not cover in this week's reading. Please study that individually and with your family. And as always, fight on.